Packers should have a strong offense in 2025 with the return of Jordan Love, Josh Jacobs. The wide receiver room is going to be very solid and a pretty good offensive line as well. On the defensive side of the ball, also pretty solid on the defensive line, but they love cheese so much in Wisconsin, they decided to make the secondary out of it. So that is going to be a major concern for Green Bay this season. And in week one against the Lions, I think that they're in danger of being exposed right away. This is a very talented Lions team, went 15-2 in the regular season last year before being upset by the Commanders in the divisional round. They're going to be very strong once again this season. Jared Goff back at quarterback. Amon-Ra St. Brown's going to do some terrible things to this Packers secondary. And I think the Lions will start 1-0.
Next week is a primetime game on Thursday night against the Commanders. And the Commanders were that team that upset the Lions in the divisional round and fell one game short of reaching a Super Bowl, losing to the eventual Super Bowl champs. And the Commanders just keep getting better and better. Obviously, Jaden Daniels is back as the starting quarterback, and we do not think he is in for a sophomore slump. We think he's going to be just as good, if not better. The wide receiver room added Deebo Samuel, and while he is not the same wide receiver that he once was, he's still going to be able to provide valuable snaps for this offense and take some of that pressure off of Terry McLaurin. Not to mention they added Von Miller to their defense very recently, and that's just a much needed edge rusher that they get to bring in beside a pretty solid defense. And then the biggest concern was the offensive line, and they patched it up pretty nicely, taking Josh Conerly Jr. in the first round, along with trading for Laremy Tunsil. This Commanders team has a lot going for them. The only unfortunate thing is that this is a home game for the Packers, and Lambeau is one of the tougher places to play in, especially in prime time. And even though the Packers, like Jonah mentioned, are going to have a sketchy secondary, the rest of this team is just so good. And I think they will be able to win a shootout, especially against a team like the Commanders. Maybe Jaden Daniels makes a couple mistakes earlier on in the season, especially against this Packers team that has a solid pass rush. I think this is a game the Packers can pull off a little bit of an upset in, and that's what we have them doing, moving to 1-1 early on in the season, but getting a really big statement win over the Commanders.
Made a quick edit fixing the time of the game, but the Packers are making a road trip to Cleveland, and this one is going to be relatively interesting. Joe Flacco likely going to be the starter early on in the season. There's been some reports that it might be Shadur, but I don't think he'll make a push until later in the year, once the Browns season is likely already over. Now, I think the Packers are a very solid team, but going on the road to Cleveland, it doesn't sound that difficult, but I do think that there's going to be a few teams that get surprised this season, and the Packers are likely going to be one of them at some point. And after pulling off a really solid win against the Commanders, I think that they get upset here on the road and lose to a honestly not very good Browns team.
And while this might be a little shocking, there is some things that we can point to. And even though the Packers do have a pretty solid offensive line, especially in pass protection, they struggled a little bit last year in the run game. Now, Josh Jacobs still had a pretty good season, but it's still one of the weaker points of this offensive line. And this Browns defensive line got better this offseason. You already have Myles Garrett coming off the edge, but they drafted Mason Graham in the first round, and he was an absolute unit at Michigan and one of the best interior defensive linemen we've seen in the last few years. And he's just going to be able to clog up so much in the middle for that Browns defense. And at the end of the day, it's going to come down to a shootout, and I trust the Browns secondary more than I trust the secondary of the Packers. So it'll come down to the very end. But the Browns can pull off an upset. They're good for maybe a couple upsets along the way. Packers then go on the road again, and this time it's to face America's team in prime time, the Dallas Cowboys. And the Cowboys added George Pickens in the offseason to pair with CeeDee Lamb, another weapon for Dak Prescott, hoping he stays healthy. This Cowboys team can be pretty solid. The defense looks great, assuming they stay healthy as well. Trevon Diggs coming off of an injury, DeMarvion Overshown also coming off of injury. But if they're back and fully healthy, this Dallas defense is going to be very solid. The only issue I have with this Cowboys team is the running back room. They added Javonte Williams and Miles Sanders in the offseason after Rico Dowdle ended up signing elsewhere, but that really doesn't move the needle for me as much as some people might think. Now, they are solid options. Javonte Williams still has a good amount of potential, even though he was not very successful in Denver. But if Dallas is going to rely on Dak to throw the ball 40, nearly 50 times a game, he's bound to make some mistakes. Even against the Packers secondary that isn't too strong, they still have Xavier McKinney at the safety position, and he was second in the league in interceptions last year. If he's able to pick off Dak Prescott a couple times and this defensive line is able to get home, then I think this Packers offense can win a bit of a shootout against the Cowboys. And that's really just going to be the story of the season for the Packers is winning shootout games against a lot of these great teams on their schedule. We are going to have them winning this game in prime time, so they're going to be 2-0 against the NFC East to start the year, despite falling to the Lions and Browns early on.
But what's next could actually hurt the Packers this season. A very, very early bye week. When trying to make a push for the playoffs, having to play 13 games in a row to end the season is not what you need to happen. And the first one of those games isn't easy either. A home matchup with Joe Burrow and the Bengals. Jamar Chase always a threat, and he's one of the top two wide receivers in all of football. That is just a scary connection that's dating back all the way to LSU. The Bengals defense is still a concern, and I think that the Packers have a really good chance in this one, especially being at home in Lambeau. That's going to make it a little bit easier. And really, they match up pretty well. Jamar Chase against the Packers secondary is a very scary matchup, like we were talking about earlier. But I think that especially just because they're at home, that maybe the Bengals just make a few more mistakes, especially on defense, and the Packers can actually win a shootout here, which seems crazy to pick them to beat the Bengals right after we have them losing to the Browns a couple weeks earlier. But you never know what can happen in the NFL. Crazier things have happened than one team losing to the Browns and then beating the Bengals.
Especially when you could point to the Bengals having some issues within the team, not necessarily with teammates, but the team versus the general manager of the organization. Mainly the issues with Trey Hendrickson and Shamar Stewart signing extensions or signing their rookie deal. Maybe that tension kind of boils over into the actual gameplay, and maybe that's where we could see the Packers pull off this win. The following week against the Cardinals on the road is also going to be a pretty interesting one. The Cardinals are a team that we are both pretty high on going into this year. They have made some solid moves and just developed their players pretty well this offseason. Marvin Harrison Jr., after a pretty lackluster start to his NFL career, bulked up a lot and is looking like he's going to terrify the rest of the NFL. And like we've made a point of, this Packers secondary is going to need a lot of help if they're going to stop some of these wide receivers. Not to mention that the Cardinals also returned Trey McBride, who was one of the best tight ends in the NFL last year. Kyler Murray playing to hopefully stay in Arizona. If he's able to have a successful season, then he is the franchise guy. If he doesn't meet expectations, maybe the Cardinals move on, especially with a loaded quarterback draft class next year. And defensively, they made some good additions as well, especially through the draft, drafting Walter Nolan on the defensive line, getting Will Johnson as an absolute steal, going to be a huge asset to the secondary. Buda Baker also returning. I just think the Cardinals have a lot going in the right direction, and with the home field advantage, we'll be able to beat the Packers here just because, like we've been saying, the Packers have been an up and down team so far this season. They've been beating some good teams and losing to some teams that maybe they shouldn't have, like the Browns and maybe like the Cardinals. So we're going to have the Cardinals win this game, dropping the Packers to 500 for the third time this season.
And I do actually think the Cardinals are kind of underrated this season. A lot of the points that you hit on are really what I would have gone over, but the Cardinals are going to have a solid chance to win the NFC West this season, and I think they're going to be a very good team. Then going on the road to Pittsburgh in prime time, the Aaron Rodgers revenge game. This one is going to be good. Both teams obviously want to win. The Packers beating their former quarterback, Aaron Rodgers beating his former team. And I think the Steelers are going to be pretty solid this season. But if we know anything about the Steelers, it's that they're going to finish somewhere between 8 and 10 wins, which gives a lot of room for teams to beat them. I think in this scenario, that in prime time, Aaron Rodgers is not going to get the win. I just don't know if the Steelers have enough weapons, beyond DK Metcalf, that they'll be able to win this game. It's going to be really tough for them. And even though they're at home, we are going to take Green Bay to hop back above 500.
And they will get another win to move 2 games above 500 the following week against the Panthers. And this is the same Panthers team that we've seen in past years. They started to hit their stride a little bit towards the end of last year and were definitely a better team than they were 2 years ago. Bryce Young has developed a little bit after being benched early on in the season and then returning to the starting lineup. And they went out and got him probably the best weapon he will have for a long time in Tataroa McMillan, going to be his number one wide receiver in Carolina. And I really think this Panthers team is going to surprise some people. Now, I don't know if they're going to be able to compete for an NFC South division title. But I do think they can make things interesting, not only in the NFC South, but in the rest of the NFL, maybe competing with some of these tougher teams more than people are giving them credit for. Obviously, Chuba Hubbard is also back, who could end up being another solid option on this offense. And defensively, I think they're in a great shape, drafting Nick Scorton to be a edge rusher and a linebacker. The secondary is looking great once again. Really, I think the Panthers have a lot of potential here, but they are not better than this Packers team. So the Packers will move to 5-3.
And then looking to carry the momentum on Monday night against the Eagles. And the home field advantage is going to be a huge factor here. You're going to need it when facing the defending Super Bowl champs, and the Eagles have just reloaded. They're going to be incredible once again this season. The offensive line, always a strength. Jalen Hurts, one of the better quarterbacks in the league. Saquon Barkley has another chance to maybe be the MVP. The defense is really good. There's just so many things about this Eagles team that are incredible. And although I think the Eagles have a really good chance at being the best team in all of football next season, they are not going to go 17-0. The Packers have the capability to beat some really good teams, and I think they're going to do that this season. They're very interesting in the way that they have the talent to beat really good teams, but they also have the ability to lose to some of the worst teams in the league. I think in this case, on a 2-game win streak, the Packers can actually carry the momentum forward and beat the Eagles in prime time at home.
And they got a little extra motivation considering the Packers were the ones that proposed to ban the tush push this offseason, and that was ultimately denied. And now they can look to get the revenge and stop the tush push however many times they feel like in this game. Now, riding all this momentum, especially beating the reigning Super Bowl champs, you would think a road trip to face the Giants would be a piece of cake. Well, you know how we've been saying that the Packers have the talent to beat good teams, but also have the potential to lose some bad games. Yeah, this is going to be one of them. However unlikely it may seem, the Giants actually have a decent roster around them. Now, the offense has a lot of questions, much like the Browns. The quarterback room is a mess in a way. It's a funny mess, but it is still a mess. You have Russell Wilson, you have Jameis Winston, you have Jackson Dart, who was drafted, and you also have Tommy DeVito. The running back room, pretty empty, but the wide receiver room, it's mediocre outside of Malik Neighbors, who is looking like the best wide receiver from last year's draft class. But defensively, oh boy, this Giants defense is looking pretty nasty. You obviously have Dexter Lawrence and Kayvon Thibodeau returning, but they drafted Darius Alexander, a defensive tackle out of Toledo, and with the number 3 overall pick, got Abdul Carter, one of the best edge rushers we have seen in college football. This Giants defense is going to be legit. And I do think after three wins in a row against some good competition, the Packers are going to get a little bit of a reality check and drop this game to the Giants on the road.
Which seems incredibly shocking after beating the Eagles, but I feel like it makes sense to have a letdown game in that scenario. Moving on is a home matchup with the Vikings. This one's not going to be easy. We've been talking about how this Packers secondary is not going to be very good this season, and having to face Justin Jefferson, not an easy task whatsoever. But what I do think actually is going to make it easier is that the Vikings no longer have Sam Darnold. Darnold had an almost MVP caliber season last year, and while I don't think he was going to repeat those numbers, I do think that JJ McCarthy is a serious downgrade from Sam Darnold. Now, McCarthy was very highly touted coming out of college, but he suffered an injury and did not play for an entire season. So he's going to be stepping onto an NFL field without having any playing experience in a live game after 18 months. That's not something that's very easy to do, and I wasn't super high on him as a prospect in the first place. So this is a very concerning thing for the Vikings. And going on the road to play the Packers, I think the Packers are going to be able to get it done strictly because I don't think that Justin Jefferson is going to have the quarterback who can get him the ball enough to make a massive impact.
Especially in JJ McCarthy's first game against the Packers. Maybe they have a chance in the rematch, especially with it being at home for the Vikings, but that is the closer to these team seasons, so we will get to that later. They will go on the road the following week to face the Lions, though, hoping to avenge that week one loss, but I really don't see how they will be able to beat the Lions on the road. Ford Field has become a sneaky hard place to play in since the Lions have sort of revitalized their entire franchise. And much like we said earlier on, the Lions just have all the weapons you need to really just cook this Packers secondary. And I think in game two, they'll be able to stop any sort of defensive pressure they have coming after them. And on the defensive side for the Lions, they have some solid guys. Aiden Hutchinson returning from injury had DPOI aspirations last year before being shut down for the season. And if he's able to come back with that same fire, then I think the Lions are going to be in great shape and actually will have another chance to reach a Super Bowl. The next week against the Bears, hosting the Bears is going to be interesting because the Bears, for the second year in a row, have won the offseason. And we know how that went last year. They won 5 games. Now, they do have an offensive minded coach. They got Ben Johnson from the Detroit Lions, who was their OC and the mastermind behind a lot of their success. They drafted Luther Burden and Colston Loveland in the NFL draft, more weapons for Caleb Williams to use in year two. And if he's able to progress with an actual coach this time, then the Bears can be a decent team. The questions, much like the Packers, are more on the defense. It's not the secondary. The Bears secondary is looking very decent. It is the pass rush in that case. Can they generate a decent enough pass rush to sort of mess with opposing quarterbacks? And I don't think they will be able to do that, especially at home against Lambeau. Caleb Williams kind of did it to himself, saying that he is 1-0 at Lambeau to start his career after beating the bench players last season. And I think the Packers will come back with a vengeance and beat the Bears here.
And then it's a road trip to Denver, one of the surprising teams from last season. The most surprising part was Bo Nix in his rookie season having an incredible year, and it was really overshadowed by just how amazing the Commanders and Jaden Daniels were. I think Bo Nix, like Jaden Daniels, is going to be able to avoid the sophomore slump. He has a solid offensive line protecting him. And Nix is going to be pretty solid once again this season. The Broncos also have a strong defense. They have some good weapons for Bo Nix. I do think the Broncos are going to be a very good team once again this year. And while they might not compete for an AFC West title, they're certainly going to be able to at least challenge the Chiefs in the games that they play them in. And in this one against the Packers, it's definitely going to be tough for Green Bay to go win on the road against the Broncos. I think they pick up a little bit of a reality check here after getting 3 games above 500, their highest mark this season. I think they'll drop this one and fall to 8-6. And then a rematch with the Bears, beating them at home just 2 weeks earlier. This season, I do think that the Bears are going to be a little bit improved and they have the ability to beat the Packers. Now, like Connor said, I don't think it's going to happen at Lambeau, but I wouldn't be surprised if the Bears can win this matchup at home. Playing a team and beating them 2 times in one season is not very easy to do. And the Bears are a lot closer in total talent to the Packers this season. So I think they're going to be able to split the season series, dropping Green Bay to 8-7 now and potentially in danger of missing the playoffs.
And it's not going to be an easy task to maintain a playoff spot if they are in one or fight for a playoff spot if they are on the outside looking in as they take on the Ravens. It is a home game, which will be a deciding factor here. The Ravens are looking like the top dogs in the AFC going into next season. They added Jair Alexander, a former Packer, to their secondary along with Kyle Hamilton. They drafted Malachi Starks and they still have Marlon Humphrey. This secondary is just ridiculous. The defensive line added Mike Green from Marshall, who's going to be a solid edge rusher. And then offensively, where do you even begin? You have Lamar Jackson, who arguably should have been the MVP last year by his numbers, but Josh Allen did have a little bit more production and some better wins. But he also has Derrick Henry in the backfield. Zay Flowers and Rashad Bateman are still out wide. This Ravens team is just looking super, super good and are honestly my favorites to win the Super Bowl going into next year. As of right now, we'll see how the season plays out. But like we've been saying, the Packers are on a roller coaster of a ride this season. And I do think with a playoff berth on the line, they will somehow manage to beat this Ravens team. The good thing for them is that the Ravens don't tend to throw the ball nearly as much as some of these other teams just because their wide receivers maybe aren't as good as, say, Justin Jefferson or Jamar Chase like they play earlier on in the season. Maybe at this point, the guys that are stepping up in the secondary actually improve and are solid. And like I was saying, the Ravens tend to run the ball more often than not, considering they have Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry. And I think the Packers could be able to stop that early on and force Lamar into some throwing situations. Granted, he doesn't turn the ball over very much, at least not of his own fault. But once again, with so much on the line for the Packers, I do think they are going to be able to get a win at Lambeau over the Ravens, however unlikely it may be. We're saying that a lot this season for the Packers. And then to wrap it up, it is a road trip to face the Vikings. And like I mentioned earlier, this is a game where the Vikings probably have a little bit better of a chance because they host the Packers. It's the second time JJ McCarthy will get to play the Packers, and maybe they can game plan on how to stop this defensive pass rush that Green Bay brings. And even though the Vikings had a really bad offensive line last year, they made a lot of improvements. They signed two free agents to bolster this offensive line, along with drafting Donovan Jackson out of Ohio State to play one of the guard positions. That is just going to be enough protection to level up this offensive line to at least the middle of the pack in the NFL to protect JJ McCarthy. At this point in the season, the wide receivers might be able to step it up and really just pick apart this Green Bay secondary. And defensively, this is where the Vikings will shine. Andrew Van Ginkel and Jonathan Grenard are coming off of very successful seasons. The secondary, even though it is not too strong and they didn't address it very much, can still be kind of decent with the return of some key players, whether it's off of injury or just returning from last season. The Vikings have a real shot in this one. And I do think they can play spoiler a little bit and defeat the Green Bay Packers. You're dropping them to 9-8. Will that be enough to get the Packers into the wild card spot in the playoffs? I don't know if it will be. We'll have to see once we get to the full standings.
Last season, the Packers did go 11-6, and I think they're going to struggle just a little bit more this season, which is why we have them dropping to 9-8, but still above 500. The floor, if absolutely everything goes wrong for this team, the secondary is as big of a problem as we think it is, and maybe even worse. They could fall all the way to 5-12, even though I think that is an incredibly unlikely scenario. The ceiling, I think, is the same as last year. They can hit 11-6 again. This would surely lock in a playoff spot and be a really solid season for Green Bay. The Vegas over-under is at 9.5, and it's just slightly favoring the under. So actually right there with our prediction of 9-8.
And like we've been saying this entire prediction, the Packers are just going to be a weird team next year with such a strong team outside of that secondary. And if that secondary steps up, maybe the Packers can improve and reach that ceiling, maybe even go a little bit above that ceiling. But with such a tough schedule, I do find it pretty difficult to think that they can do much better than hovering around 500 because like we said, we have them losing to some pretty bad teams, but we also have them beating some of the best teams in the NFL. So I think around 500, leaning a little bit above 500 is probably where we're going to end up seeing this Packers team. So thank you guys for watching. Please make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on any more of our videos, and we will see you in the next one.